They didn't save me a plate. That sounds dramatic, I know. But it's the kind of moment you don't forget. Thanksgiving at my sister's house had become a tradition. I wasn't always on time, between working late at the clinic, stopping to pick up something homemade, and trying not to cry on the highway. I usually walked in a little after everyone else. But this year, something felt ... colder ... When I walked through the front door, nobody looked up. The smell of stuffing, cranberry glaze, and baked macaroni was thick in the air. Laughter floated through the living room. Children raced down the hallway. Glasses clinked. But not a single "Hey, Claire," not even a "Glad you made it." I held a pie in my hands. Freshly baked pecan, the kind Mom used to make. I was still wearing my coat. My hair was still wet from the drizzle outside. I peeked around the dining table. Empty trays, plates scraped clean. People full, satisfied, happy. And there wasn't a seat left for me. My niece looked up from her phone and said, "Oh, I didn't think you were still coming." I blinked. Still coming? Wasn't I family? Wasn't I supposed to belong here? I gently placed the pie on the edge of the kitchen counter. There wasn't any room left near the food, and stood there for a moment, hoping someone would notice. They didn't. I walked out quietly. No tears, no drama. Just a deep, quiet ache that settled in my chest like a stone. I got back into my car. I didn't even turn on the heat. I just drove. Down the same streets I'd known for 30 years, but they didn't feel like mine anymore. 15 minutes later, I passed by a small church. Not fancy, just a white wooden building with twinkle lights and a hand-painted sign. Everyone welcome. Warm food, warm hearts. I parked. I hesitated. And then I walked in. Inside, it smelled like love. Not just food love. There was an old man in a cardigan playing guitar. 2 teenagers were setting tables. A woman handed me a plate before I even said my name. "Sit wherever you like, honey." I sat next to a woman I didn't know. She had a kind smile and offered me mashed potatoes. We talked about pies, about loneliness, about unexpected blessings. And that's when it hit me. Maybe I wasn't meant to sit at that old table anymore. Maybe I was meant to build a new one, for others like me, for the forgotten, the overlooked, the ones who still show up, even when no one saves them a seat. That night, I didn't cry. I smiled, because I'd found something better than a plate. I'd found a purpose. Asterisk the next morning. I woke up with something I hadn't felt in a while. Clarity. It wasn't joy exactly, but it was close. It was that feeling you get when the fog starts to lift and you can finally see the road ahead, even if just a few feet at a time. I sat at the edge of my bed, still in the clothes from the night before. The smell of roasted sweet potatoes clung to my sweater, and oddly, I liked it. It reminded me that I had shared a table with strangers who had looked me in the eye and smiled like I mattered. That morning, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and stared out the kitchen window. The world hadn't changed, but I had. And I knew one thing. I wasn't going to sit around waiting to be invited anymore. Pulled out an old notebook I hadn't touched in years. The kind with pages yellowed at the corners and ink stains. That told stories of another life. On the first clean page, I wrote, "New Table Project." That's what I called it. It felt silly at first, like a child pretending to build something out of blocks and dreams. But the more I wrote, the more real it became. A table. Not just wood and nails, but a space. A moment for those like me. For those forgotten at holidays, skipped at dinners, and left behind in group texts. I started brainstorming places. The church from the night before? Maybe. Or my backyard. I could string lights, borrow folding chairs, even use grandma's. China. I imagined people showing up with nothing but stories, and leaving with hope. But then, like clockwork, the doubt crept in. Who do you think you are, Claire? You're not a leader. You're not special. You couldn't even get a plate at your sister's. I closed the notebook and pushed it aside. But something in me, the part that had smiled over mashed potatoes with a stranger, whispered, "Do it anyway." So I did. I called the church. The same one with the twinkle lights and peeling white paint. The woman who answered the phone, her name was Linda, remembered me. "You sat near the window and asked for seconds on pie," she said. Laughing, she offered me their basement hall for the next Saturday. "Just bring your heart," she said. And I did. I had no clue who would come, no idea what I'd serve. But I knew this. Sometimes healing doesn't begin with an invitation. It begins with a decision. Saturday came faster than I expected. I stood outside the church basement, arms full of mismatched dishes and a crock-pot that had seen better days. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from something deeper. Fear, maybe. Hope, definitely. Inside, Linda and her granddaughter had already set up folding tables. Old Christmas tablecloths covered the scratches, and fairy lights dangled from the ceiling like tiny stars trying their best to shine. I had brought soup, a simple lentil recipe from my grandmother's handwritten cookbook. It smelled like winter. Nights and stories by the fireplace. As I stirred, I wondered, would anyone come? At exactly 6:15, the door creaked open. A man with salt and pepper hair and a boy no older than 10 peeked in. "We heard about the food," he said, almost apologetically. I smiled. "You're in the right place." Others followed. A young woman with tear-streaked cheeks who hadn't spoken to her family in 2 years. A retired teacher who had lost his wife last spring. A mother with a baby in her arms and eyes that had forgotten how to sparkle. They came with empty hands and heavy hearts. But as they sat and ate and talked, something changed. We weren't strangers anymore. We were survivors. Survivors of neglect, loss, silence. Survivors of being left off guest lists and out of family photos. I watched them laugh. Real, belly-deep laughter over second servings of soup. The young woman helped the older man with his coat. The child offered a cookie to the teacher. And I breathed deep. Full for the first time in months, maybe years. I felt seen near the end of the night. Linda turned to me and whispered, "You've started something, Claire. Something holy." I didn't know if it was holy, but I knew it was. Healing. And I knew this. Sometimes when no one saves you a plate, you build a table. And you let the hurting eat first. The next morning, I got a text from my daughter. Not an apology. Not a thank you for the soup photo I'd sent with a little heart emoji. Just one line. "Did you really host some kind of charity dinner?" I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. What I wanted to write, maybe if he'd picked up the phone, you would have known. What I actually wrote, yes, it was lovely. And then I turned my phone off. Because peace, darling, is a choice. And I was making it, moment by moment, but that didn't mean it didn't hurt. Later that afternoon, I walked past the coffee shop where my daughter used to take me every Mother's Day when she remembered. The smell of cinnamon and espresso nearly broke me. I sat on a bench nearby, the kind with flaking paint and rust on the armrest. A lady with a tiny dog sat down beside me. We exchanged polite nods. Then she said, "Are you okay?" I opened my mouth to say I was fine, but instead, I told her everything. The soup night, the empty table, the text. She listened. Really listened. Then she said something that hit me right between the ribs. Sometimes, the ones we raised aren't the ones who lift us up, but that doesn't mean we stop rising. Her name was Patricia. She had 3 grown sons who only called when they needed money. We sat there, two invisible women on a forgotten bench, talking like old friends. Before leaving, she squeezed my hand and said, "I'll come to your next dinner, and I'll bring dessert." I smiled, not just with my mouth, but with my heart, because that's the thing about rejection, Donnie. It stings, oh, it stings, but it doesn't have to define you. You can still show up. You can still serve soup. And you can still smile, even if your mascara runs a little. Asterisk, asterisk. That Friday night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I set the table again, that same mismatched plates. Same soup pot on the stove. But this time, I lit candles, real ones. Not the battery kind. I even put on lipstick, not for anyone in particular. Just for me. At 6:03 p.m., the doorbell rang. I froze. It wasn't my daughter. Of course it, WASN single quotes, T. It was Patricia. With a lemon pie and a new friend named Doris, who walked with a cane and a sass that could cut glass. Doris said, "I heard there'd be food and feelings. I'm in." By 6:30, there were 6 of us around the table. A woman who'd just gone through a divorce after 42 years. A retired nurse who missed the chaos of the A young single mom who saw my flyer on the laundromat bulletin board. None of us had matching stories, but all of us had one thing in common. We knew what it felt like to be left out. We passed bread. We shared tears. We laughed, the loud, snorting kind. At one point, someone said, "This feels like church without the pews." And someone else whispered, "It feels like home." And me? I just sat there, spoon in hand, heart cracked wide open, thinking ... So this is what healing sounds like. After everyone left, I washed the dishes alone. But it didn't feel lonely. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for a seat at someone else's table. I had built my own. Asterisk, 2 days later, I stood in aisle 7 of the grocery store, the frozen food section, holding a bag of peas and a bag of guilt. You see, forgiveness isn't some grand speech or magical moment. Sometimes it starts in front of the broccoli florets. When you see your daughter, she was there, looking at the frozen pizzas, her back turned. And me? I just froze. My legs wanted to walk. My heart wanted to run. But my soul? It whispered. "Stay." I said her name, just loud enough for the peas to hear. She turned, slowly, her eyes wide. We stood there for 5 full seconds. No words, just decades between us and some bird's eye vegetables. Then she said, "Mom?" And I said, "You don't have to say anything. I just ... I hope you're okay." She looked like she might cry, or laugh, or bolt. But she didn't single quotes T. Instead, she said, "I miss you." The air came back into my lungs. We didn't hug. Not yet. But there was something softer in her voice. Something human. We talked. Not about the big stuff. Not yet. Just about pea soup. And coupons. And how her son, my grandson, loved waffles. But I felt something shift. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the door opened. And that's enough to let the light in. Later that night, I sat in my kitchen, the same table where I once cried alone on Thanksgiving, and I wrote 3 words on a napkin. Start with soup. Asterisk, the next week, I got an invitation. Not a fancy one. It was a folded piece of paper taped to my front door. It simply said, "Noah's birthday. Saturday at 3. Backyard." No signature. No RSVP. Just that ... My hands trembled as I held it. Noah ... My grandson. I'd only seen him in pictures. Heard. Stories. But never his little laugh or how he held his juice box. Saturday came. I almost didn't go. I stood by the mirror for 20 minutes adjusting the same blouse. I changed earrings 3 times. I nearly talked myself out of it. But then I remembered something from years ago. How I once showed up to a school talent show wearing mismatched shoes, and my daughter laughed so hard she cried. So, I wore those same earrings from that night. Because maybe, just maybe, laughter still had a seat at the table. I arrived early. Not on purpose, just nerves. The backyard was filled with balloons and kids, and noise and chaos. I stood there, invisible. For a moment they felt like a century. And then I saw her. My daughter. She looked up from a pile of juice boxes, saw me, and nodded. A single nod. That's all it took, like a signal that said, "You're allowed." She didn't rush over. Didn't hug me like in a movie. Instead, she handed me a paper plate and said, "He likes chocolate cake. Don't mess it up, Grandma." And just like that, I was back in the small moments, back in the spaces where love doesn't need grand gestures, just a paper plate and a place to stand. That night, I went home, took off those earrings and smiled, not because everything was fixed, but because, for the first time in years, I wasn't the one who didn't get a plate. Asterisk, I started getting used to paper plates again. Not literal ones, though there were plenty of those, but the kind that said, "You belong here," even if no one says it out loud. Every family gathering after that felt a bit like walking on a frozen lake, careful, quiet, afraid the wrong word might crack the surface. There were awkward silences. Too many. So how's the weather? Moments. Sometimes someone would leave the room when I entered, but I stayed. I showed up. Again and again. Because healing isn't loud. It's not confetti and fireworks and movie montage music. It's passing the salt at dinner. It's offering to take the baby when she cries. It's leaving a slice of pie wrapped in foil on someone's porch. No note, just trust. And little by little, they stopped flinching when I laughed. They started calling me again. For small things. A cookie recipe. A missing sock. A ride to the airport. My phone stopped being just an alarm clock and started being a bridge. And one day, my daughter, the same one who once looked to me like glass, asked if I could babysit Noah just for an hour. When she came back, she found us both asleep on the couch, his head on my lap, my hand resting on his tiny back. She didn't say anything, but she smiled. And that smile, it was louder than any apology, softer than any sorry. And it meant everything. Asterisk, it was Thanksgiving. The kind of chilly morning where your breath looks like a ghost and the ground crunches under your boots. I baked 2 pies, one for the church's community table and one just in case. Well, just in case someone asked if I was coming over. No one did. So I put on my best cardigan, the soft green one with buttons shaped like little apples, and I took a long walk past familiar houses with smoke curling from chimneys, the smell of cinnamon and turkey lingering in the air. I ended up at the park, empty swings, a squirrel too bold for its own good, and a single family playing football in the distance. That's when my phone buzzed. A text from my son. "We have extra stuffing. If you want to stop by." Just like that. No capital letters. No emoji. But it may as well have been fireworks. I stood in the cold, rereading it, my fingers trembling more from nerves than the weather. I walked up their porch. I didn't know what to expect, but the door opened before I knocked. And there they were, my son, his wife, their sleepy toddler clinging to a teddy bear. No dramatic speeches, no violins. Just, "Mom, we were just about to eat," and a seat next to the cranberry sauce, with my name on a folded piece of paper, spelled perfectly, even with the E at the end. They saved me a plate. No, scratch that. They made me a place. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like an afterthought. I felt home. Asterisk, asterisk. That Thanksgiving table was nothing fancy. The mashed potatoes were a little lumpy, and the rolls came from a can. But to me, it felt like dining with royalty. My grandson insisted I sit next to him. He kept sneaking green beans onto my plate, whispering, "You have to eat vegetables if you want to come back next year." And my daughter-in-law, the one eye, was sure didn't like me. She asked for my pie recipe, said it tasted like something warm from a childhood memory. As we cleared the table, I noticed the framed photos on the wall. One had been added. It was me from years ago, holding my son when he was just a baby. I nearly dropped the dishes. It wasn't just that they remembered me. It was that they wanted me there. Again, later that evening, as the house quieted and the dishes dried, my son brought me a blanket and asked, "Want to stay the night?" I hadn't slept in a house full of people in years. I almost said no, but then I saw the guest room, fresh sheets, a little vase of flowers, a note that said, "Welcome back, Mom." I cried, not because I was sad, but because I realized I wasn't just visiting. I'd been missed. I'd been forgiven. I'd been remembered. And maybe, just maybe, I belonged again. Asterisk. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the guest room curtains, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't wake up with that weight in my chest. Instead, I heard laughter, pancakes sizzling, my grandson singing off-key in the kitchen. I sat up, wrapped in the softest blanket, the kind only families keep around for people they love. There was a knock at the door. "Mom," my son said, poking his head in, "come eat before everything gets cold." At the table, there were no awkward silences, just syrup, smiles, soft teasing. I wasn't a burden. I wasn't just visiting. I was home. After breakfast, my daughter-in-law walked with me in the garden. She took my arm gently and said, "I'm sorry we didn't make room sooner. We didn't know how much we needed you." I told her the truth. I didn't know how much I needed this either. Later, before I packed to leave, my son slipped me a small envelope. Inside was a photo, me, him, and his family from the night before. On the back, written in his handwriting, "Not just Thanksgiving, every holiday. We want you here." I smiled, because this wasn't about pity. It wasn't about guilt. It was love, real, repaired, raw. And as I got into the car to drive home, I looked at that picture again and whispered to myself, "They set a place for me this time." And I brought dessert. Asterisk. I came back to my quiet little house, expecting the usual silence, the hum of the refrigerator, the stillness of the living room. But everything felt different. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was that I no longer felt invisible. That night, I lit one candle, not for the people who forgot me, but for the ones I met at that community center dinner. The single mom, the widower, the teenager who offered me his chair. They had smiled at me like I mattered, and I had smiled back like I believed it. I opened the cupboard and pulled out my best dishes, the ones I used to save for holidays. Set the table again, not just for family, but for anyone who needed it. This time, the door didn't stay closed. That December, I hosted 3 dinners. I made too much food on purpose. Laughter filled the cracks in my home. I didn't need to be anyone's obligation. I chose to be someone's joy. One night, a young woman named Ava, who I'd met at that first dinner, asked if she could bring a few friends. "Bring as many as you want," I said, handing her a stack of plates. "Just make sure they're hungry." She laughed. "You sure?" I smiled. "Honey, no one saved me a plate once." I swore I'd never let someone feel like that again. Later, after everyone left, I sat at the table alone. Candles still flickering. Empty cups, scraps of pie. But my heart? Full. And right then, I finally understood. I wasn't forgotten. I was redirected. Not to bitterness, but to purpose. Not to loneliness, but to community. I got up, wrote a little note, and stuck it to the fridge. They didn't save me a plate, so I built a table instead. And that, my friends, was the beginning of everything. Asterisk. And now, dear friends, if this story touched you in any way, maybe it reminded you of your own struggles, or gave you hope when you needed it most, I want you to know something. You are not alone. Margaret's story teaches us that pain doesn't get the final word. Abandonment doesn't define your worth. And sometimes, the family we build with kindness can be stronger than the one we were born into. If you've ever felt left out, forgotten, or pushed aside, remember, there's power in creating space for others. There's beauty in starting over. There's healing in choosing love again, even when it hurts. So let this be a reminder. You matter. Your story matters. And there's always a seat at the table for someone like you. If this touched your heart, I invite you to do 3 simple things. Leave a comment and share what this story meant to you. Like this video, it helps more people find stories of emotional healing and faith. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story that just might change your life. And hey, if you know someone who feels alone, send them this video. It might be the warm hug they didn't know they needed. Until next time, my friends, stay strong, stay kind, and never forget, you are never too old, too late, or too far gone to build something beautiful again. See you in the next story.